Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You're catching us for episode 15. I'm Jaden, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Chris. It's been a so-so week of baseball for the both of us, I would say, this past week, but we're gonna break it down this past week and the month of April. Now that we're into May, we're gonna sort of give you our thoughts from the first month of the season, first month plus, and we're going to give you that for the Guardians and the Reds. Chris, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Actually, I think my Guardians had a pretty good week, all things considered, especially with how much was thrown their way. To come out of the week 5-2 when we weren't even supposed to win a lot of the games that we did this week, that's a good feeling. So, um,
Yeah, if I can be totally honest, I did not realize you guys went 5-2 last week. There was
that's okay.
there were some pretty negative messages from
Yeah, there were.
a lot of Guardian
Yeah,
fans, so it maybe a little more doom than was necessary in the group chat.
maybe, but we weren't supposed to win those games, like I said. So I
Yeah.
thought for sure that we were going to lose. We didn't look good for a lot of those games. But anyway,
Yeah, well, it was a so-so week for the Reds. They went 3-4 last week. And I'll touch on some of the issues I've seen with this team sort of as a whole in the last month, and I think that sort of touches on last week as well. But first, we're gonna get started with something that isn't a breakdown from the last month. It's a personal update for me. So
milestone.
I went to the Reds game yesterday, and I was lucky enough to catch Tyler Stevenson's home run in the second inning. It was his first home run of the season. He just came back from the IL, so first ball I've ever caught at a major league game, first game ball I've ever caught at a major league game, and it's a pretty cool story. My dad got the tickets on Facebook the day before, so on Saturday he texted me and he was like, "Are you doing anything tomorrow? Do you want to go?" Someone's selling tickets on Facebook. Do you want to go down to the Reds game? And I was like, yeah, sure. Then he texted me the view, and we're in the first row of left field in the bottom section, and it's the first game that we've been to together, my dad and I, since my grandpa, his dad, he was a lifelong Reds fan. My grandpa, he passed away 2 weeks ago, so it was the first game we had been to together since he had passed, and you know, the Reds hold a special place in my heart and my dad's heart because of how we bonded with him um, through sports and through the Reds. You know, there was the one sports team that we all sort of agreed upon. My grandpa is a Bengals fan. My dad's a 49ers fan. I'm not super big into the NFL, but I guess my rooting interest is the Colts. But we all sort of bonded together about the Reds. And my grandpa, his one big thing was that he went to so many games in his life, and every time I would go to a game or we would go to a game with him or he would go to a game by himself, he'd come back and he'd say, "Man, I can't believe all those years going to games and I've never caught a game ball." And then, I'm not a spiritual person, but that ball finds me, flies directly into my glove off the bat of Tyler Stevenson. And, it was a special moment. It felt like maybe someone helped it get there a little bit, but it was super cool. I made a nice play on it, looked it into my glove, didn't let the moment get too big for me. 101 off the bat, so it was still screaming a little bit.
That's legit.
Caught
The
it in the
good
webbing. Yeah,
good
yeah,
fundamentals are required to catch that ball. So
definitely. But yeah, if you're one of our listeners and you want to go look it up on MLB.com, it was Sunday, May the 4th, Tyler Stevenson's home run for the Reds. You'll see me make the catch and then sort of realize I make the catch and then start celebrating. And honestly, in the video, I'm jumping up and down. I was more so jumping up and down because at that point we had just tied the game. Like, sure, I caught the home run ball, but I was high-fiving all the people around me because the Reds had tied the game. So, pretty cool moment. Got a case coming for it. But yeah, that's one I'll treasure forever. That's a memory that I'll treasure forever. But that's enough sappy stuff. Let's get into tearing apart these teams a little bit and digging into their performance through late March and April. So I'll let you kick it off with the Guardians.
yeah, so something that we're going to focus on with this episode is like what has the first month of baseball taught us about our teams? And I think that we can learn a lot about like what this team's identity was from the first month of play. There were a lot of ups and downs in the first month with the Guardians. Somehow we come out of, I know it's May 5th when we're recording this, but the first month plus of the season, the Guardians are sitting at 20 and 14, and they haven't really played, it's been inconsistent. They haven't really played their best baseball. And somehow we have the third best winning percentage or third best record in the American League. So that just goes to show the resilience of this team. And it sort of points to how the team has the same winning formula as it did a year ago. And that formula is, playing smart, clean defense, getting 5 to 6 innings per start. Bullpen is good. And then you manufacture runs and have timely hitting. And the Guardians, when they do win games, they live by that formula. They haven't really had any blowout wins this season. The Guardians have like a minus 20 run differential. It's skewed by a couple games, but it's still pretty crazy to think that the Guardians have such a negative run differential, and they have the third best record in the American League. I was looking at it, and the Guardians have about the same run differential as the Chicago White Sox. And you know how the Chicago White Sox were a year ago. They're not much better this year. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, like I said, there have been some inconsistencies. The defense hasn't looked as good as it did a year ago. Um, Jose Ramirez hasn't been amazing defensively. That could be blamed on a variety of things, such as injuries, aging, that kind of thing. It slowly has been getting cleaned up. Brian Rocchio has been that's a conversation for another day, but Brian Rocchio has made a fair amount of errors. Um, but the bad baseball has mostly been in the form of blowouts, like I kind of said. And the Guardians bounce back quickly from these blowouts and don't really let the bad vibes gets them really, which I think is huge. I think that this past week, especially after the 13-3 loss against the Red Sox, and then leading into that 11-1 blowout with the Twins in game one of the series, that really I think that we could be having a very different conversation about the Guardians today if they had just continued to lose after that those two blowouts in a row. You had two position players thrown in a row. Those were not fun games to watch. But kind of going along with how this team has had a bad run differential this year, they're 12 and 3 in 2-run games or less. They've played 15 games that are decided by 2 runs or less. They've played 34 games this year. So you're looking at almost half the games are decided by 2 runs or less. And to go along with that, they're 7-1 in 1-run games. So this team really performs when it matters, and they get that win when they're able to. And that comes from that formula I was talking about, good bullpen play, defense, etc. Um, the pitching depth has been very heavily tested so far this season. This has come from playing, like I said, a lot of close games, some inconsistencies with the starting pitchers early on, a few injuries as well. Paul Sewald, it was earlier this week, he went down on the IL, and it looks like he'll miss a significant amount of time with the shoulder injury. The Guardians acquired Matt Festa from the Rangers for cash. Matt Festa looked pretty good. He pitched a scoreless inning on Friday, and he was last Friday. He was acquired from Texas. Like I said, he was kind of a quad A guy, went back and forth, but Festa has a track record in the MLB, and he could be a dime in the rough in this bullpen. He could kind of fill the role that Pedro Avila did last year. I could definitely see that happening. Um, the Tristan McKenzie bullpen experiment was a failure. Um, when after the Guardians DFA'd him, McKenzie didn't get picked up by a single team. That kind of speaks to how little confidence that a lot of teams had in Tristan McKenzie, because a lot of teams are like the Guardians are struggling with pitching depth and nobody picked him up. So, um, yeah, the Tristan McKenzie experiment didn't go too well. And a busy playing schedule has also really tested the bullpen depth with the Guardians are still in the middle of a 25 game and 26-day stretch. They've gone through names such as Colby Allard, who has had some really good pitching performances recently out of the bullpen. He's really saved the bullpen in a couple of games now and really I feel like turned the team around in a way. Vince Velasquez, who recently got DFA'd, he's seen some time in the bullpen. Doug Nikhazy has seen some time, like I said in previous episodes. Cody Bolton has seen some time. Zach Kent, like I said, Matt Festa. None of those guys are on the opening day roster. That's a lot of guys to go through in the bullpen who weren't on the opening day roster. Um, and then the like kind of like going off what I said about the starter inconsistency, we'll have a spell of good starts and go through another spell of bad starts. So, um, like I said, that kind of goes into the Guardians not playing their best brand of baseball so far. I think if they can really get the starting pitching cleaned up a little bit, kind of eliminate those 2 to 3 inning starts where somebody blows up and then we have to use, seven relievers in the game. And, we it's a close game, but we haven't really lost any close games, but it's a blowout or something. We have to use our leverage guys. That hurts. Um, the Guardians, they have this is as of Saturday. The Guardians have a 3.88 bullpen ERA on the season. That's middle of the pack. A lot of it is inflated due to blowouts, but this team last year had an ERA that was like almost a run better than the second place team in the MLB. And I think that the having a lot of the same guys in the bullpen, I think that that's naturally going to get a little bit better. You've seen Hunter Gaddis has been off to a good start. Kate Smith has been off to a good start. Emmanuel Clase has seemed to turn a corner with his progression, going on the IL. He didn't look amazing on Sunday, but I think overall Emmanuel Clase looks a lot better. Still not what it was a year ago, but I think that's a little unrealistic to expect that. But going along with the pitching depth, reinforcements are on the way. So Shane Bieber and Trevor Stephan both started throwing live BP at the Arizona Spring Training Complex. Trevor Stephan's a guy who's been gone for a while. I feel like a lot of people don't really realize that Trevor Stephan is still a part of this ball club because he hasn't seen any time in a couple years. But Trevor Stephan was a really good reliever in 22 and 23. He was, along there, names like such as James Karinchak, Sam Henches, like he was in the back end of that bullpen a couple years ago. I'm hoping that he sort of fills that Paul Sewell role that we are missing right now once he gets back. And then Shane Bieber is kind of the same stage of his progression as Trevor Stephan. I think that if both those guys are back before the All-Star break, I think that would be a major win to see sort of some reinforcements come back on the pitching staff. This isn't a pitcher, but David Fry has also resumed. Actually, David Fry has pitched before, but he's not a pitcher. David Fry has resumed baseball activities in Arizona. Um, Again, this is a conversation for another day. I think when it gets a little bit closer to David Fry's return, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do with this roster once David Fry comes back and he can only DH for a while, coming off of Tommy John surgery. So, um, Andrew Walters and Eric Zabrowski don't have a timeline with their injuries. They've both experienced setbacks in their injury progression. I don't expect to see either of them back anytime soon. I think if one of the two of them comes back within the next few months, that would be a huge win. Um, Another kind of shifting to the offense, Jose Ramirez has not had to carry the offense so far. Ramirez is off to a bit of a slow start. I'm not worried about him, but Ramirez hasn't really been the MVP level Jose Ramirez that we've seen in the past. Injuries, he gets off to a slow start every year. I think that, it's nothing super drastic that we haven't seen from Jose yet. But the offense has, it's been middle of the pack in a lot of categories. Steven Kwan has been huge for this offense. He's been probably their most consistent hitter so far. He's hitting around 330 on the season, with like an 850 OPS. He's doing very well. Um, Kyle Manzardo is doing pretty well. He's kind of been up and down, but he's been a very nice presence in the middle of that order. Daniel Schneemann has really broken out the last week or two. He's been an amazing utility guy for the Guardians this last week or so, and he was really the reason that the Guardians won that series against Toronto. They were kind of down and out in that game, and I thought they were going to lose the second game of that Toronto series, but Schneemann had that grand slam with an out left. That was absolutely electric. So I can't say enough about how how much Daniel Schneema has meant to this team recently. Gabriel Arias has kind of been he's kind of gotten a lot of the reps recently at shortstop. So he's really broken out this year. I'm happy to see Gabriel Arias succeeding. Bo Naylor seems to have turned a corner. He had a few home runs this week. He's been making productive outs all season and having good at bats. I think, like I've said, it's a matter of time for Bo Naylor, and it seems to be things seem to be clicking for Bo Naylor, and I hope they continue to progress that way. So um, overall, this team needs to produce more than it has. I've harped about the clutch factor in this team. The Guardians only have a 239 average with runners in scoring position to the tune of a 690 OPS. Um, there is room for improvement for sure. The advanced stats say that the Guardians are still underperforming when it comes to runners in scoring position. The Guardians have a 251 BABIP with runners in scoring position this season, and that's an underperformance. A typical BABIP is between 280 and 300. So I think that the Guardians have still gotten a little bit unlucky with the way the ball has fallen this year or lack thereof. So I think there is still a lot of improvement in this team, which is really encouraging to see, to be honest, even, having a 20-14 record. Um, the Tigers are tough. I think that's kind of the final takeaway from this month of baseball is the Tigers have a 22-13 record. They look to be a powerhouse in that AL Central. Not only in the AL Central, but in the American League. I think that the Tigers are going to be very tough this year, and it's going to be a tough division to win. But I can definitely see the Guardians being, the if the season ended today, the Guardians would be a wild card team. There's nothing that points to the Guardians not, being a playoff team this year. So I feel good about the Guardians so far. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of that is definitely true for the Guardians, and some of it I think is true for the Reds as well. Something that's interesting to me, is that they are 20-14 with that run differential. It's honestly pretty shocking because it's sort of I mean, the Reds still have a winning record, but it's sort of a tale of a different team. For the Reds, they have a really high run differential. It's probably one of the best in the NL. I haven't looked since the in the last week, but they're only a game over 500 with one of the best run differentials in the NL. So, you can win both ways, definitely. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, the Guardians sort of doing what the Guardians always do, which is play good, clean baseball, and they win winnable games. And that's my first takeaway with the Reds is that this team can compete, but they like to shoot themselves in the foot and lose a lot of winnable games. They started this season 16-13 through 29 games. That was the same record as last year through 29 games. So they were 16-13 last year, 16-13 this year. Last year they lost 17 of their next 21. So, pretty abysmal May for the Reds last year. I'm hoping that that's sort of a thing where Tito can step in and make a difference. It's hard for a manager to make a difference in a lot of ways. You can only do so much with the lineup and the players you have. But it feels like if someone is going to like be able to right the ship, it's Tito. He's not going to let them go on those prolonged losing streaks. Um, and the Reds are always a team that sort of find a way to get hot in June or July. They'll rattle off like a really good 10 game stretch where they go 9-1 or something like that. And hopefully Tito can, keep us from sinking ourselves and winning only four of our next 21. And, when we get hot, we can really capitalize on it, build a lead in the division or build a lead in the wild card race. And instead of that hot stretch just getting us back to 500 or getting us into the conversation of being 500. So I think, that's the thing where Tito has to step in, be the manager that Reds fans hope he will be, is that he never lets us get too cold so that when we do get hot, it actually means something as opposed to years past. This team has lost a lot of winnable games in the first month of the season. I went through and looked at the schedule yesterday. There's about 6 to 8 games that felt like that they were up for the taking for the Reds. Ones that come to mind are opening day, obviously, and then the one where Jake Fraley hits the go-ahead grand slam in the bottom of the eighth, and Pagan gives up two homers to start the top of the ninth. Those are two that sort of stick out to me, but there are definitely more in here that, the Reds should have and probably could have won if they come up with a couple more hits with runners in scoring position or the bullpen doesn't melt down. And so 6 to 8 games where you easily could have won, you end up losing. If you even take three of those games, so you play 500 in those games, or even worse than 500. Let's say there's eight of them, you win three of those, you're tied with the Cubs for the division. So I think as much as it's a cause for concern that this team likes to shoot itself in the foot, it's also a reason to be optimistic. There's two sides to that coin. You know, if they can figure out how to win those games, and I think that they will. I'm seeing a lot of positive improvement through the first month of the season. Then this is a really good team, but they have to find out how to do that. So it's you know the path is going to diverge here soon. We've had a really easy schedule. I think we've had the second easiest schedule in baseball through the first month of the season. So we're going to start playing better teams. We've got the Braves for 4 games tonight, and then we go to Houston and play the Astros for three right after that. So we're gonna have to start playing real major league teams at some point, and it's coming, and we have to be able to win the games that we need to win. And I'm hoping that we do. It's a team that feels like they play to the level of their competition a lot. I mean, they're 2-4 against the Marlins and the Nationals. Both of those teams are not terrible teams, but that you should be 500 against those teams at
Yeah,
worst.
those teams are sneaky, especially the Nationals. The Guardians are in DC tonight, and I honestly like I with Toronto winning, 2 out of 3 in that series. I wouldn't, I always want the Guardians to win 2 out of 3, but if we lose 2 out of 3 to the Nationals, that's not the end of the world. So, especially in interleague play.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys are going to miss Mackenzie Gore, which is huge. He
Yeah,
made the Reds look really silly yesterday.
yeah,
Their
he's good.
bullpen's really bad, and we couldn't capitalize for most of the series, which I think was another problem. But I'm not really going to talk about that today. I think, something positive to take away from the first month is that the offensive struggles really seem to be behind us for the most part. I mean, yesterday it was a bad offensive game for the Reds, but you're going to have those interspersed throughout a 162 game season. You can't panic about every one or you'll drive yourself crazy. But, we're not doing the thing where we lose 1-0 3 games in a row anymore. And it looks like we're going to get no hit until the eighth inning. They're not really doing that anymore, which I think is good. They're still struggling at times to come up with the big hit or keep a rally going or something like that. But that's something where it's not as concerning as, we're going out there and we're making some guy who's got like a 6 ERA on the season look like a Cy Young candidate. We're not really doing that anymore, which I think is definitely a positive. And, lately it feels like the losses are boiling down to more pitching struggles than offensive struggles. Saturday against Washington, Nick Lodolo melts down. He gives up 6 earned runs. I'm not worried about Nick Lodolo. It's just a bad outing. He's going to have some of those, but you your second best pitcher can't go out there and give up 6 earned runs. You're not going to win that game. Now the Reds did score 6 runs in that game, but the bullpen gave up more runs. They end up losing 11-6. So it's sort of a question of that. Alexis Diaz has been blowing up out of the bullpen. He's had like a 12 ERA. He was terrible. He's been optioned down to AAA, so we don't have to worry about him for the time being. Hopefully he can figure it out. I mean, he was an all-star in 2023, so he was good at least the first half of 2023. It sort of felt like that after he made the all-star game, he sort of decided that he was done. Like he was an all-star, so he could get away with it. And I don't know that to be true statistically speaking. I haven't looked at the stats post All-Star game 2023, but it just sort of felt like that. And the stats this year are definitely showing that he's not a major league pitcher at the moment. Um,
Maybe Alexis Diaz has a leg discrepancy like his brother.
it's possible. He's always like messing with his pant legs and like shoelaces and stuff on the mound. I don't know. I don't know what his deal is. Um, I am not the world's biggest Alexis Diaz fan. That's not to say I don't want to see him succeed when he's a Red, because I want the team to play well and he's a Red, so I want to support him. But he's really struggled lately, and let's just say I'm glad to see that he's been sent down to Louisville to hopefully figure some stuff out. Um, but despite, all the pitching struggles, I still really believe in our pitching staff. I think our starters have looked really good aside from like one or two bad outings for every guy. Nick Martinez, a guy that I was harping on a couple episodes ago, has had two quality starts in a row. Brady Singer's looked good. Andrew Abbott has looked good. He's struggled in Colorado, and then he struggled on Friday against the Nationals, but it was like or against the Cardinals or something, but it was like a weird rain delay game. So, um, I think the starting rotation is really good for this team. Most of our bullpen guys I've been in on for a very long time. This is probably the most sure of the bullpen I've been probably since, we made some of those playoff runs in the early 2010s, and even before that, 'cause those bullpens really weren't great at times. So this might be one of the best bullpens that the Reds have had in my lifetime. I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being the case when the season is over. Um, now that Diaz is gone, I feel even more confident in our bullpen. Luis May got called up to replace Diaz, and he's looked good in his couple outings. He throws a 99 to 100 mile an hour sinker. He's got to work on some control stuff. But I think he's only walked one guy in his two outings. So, pretty good. He definitely looks like a guy who could be Aroldis Chapman 2.0 for the Reds. He's got
Yeah,
the same sort of velocity, and he's just he's built. He's like 6'5", 245 pure muscle.
he gives me a lot of Johan Duran vibes from the
Yeah.
Twins.
Yeah.
Kind of like he throws that deadly 100-mile-an-hour sinker and then
Yeah.
has like 103, 104-mile-an-hour four seam.
Yeah, he's got a big arm, so I
Yeah.
would like to see him stay up and succeed and do well. I think, part of the bullpen success is that Tito is doing a much better job of managing the bullpen than David Bell did. Starters are typically allowed to go longer under Tito. We're seeing guys go 7 innings, 6 innings. That was sort of David Bell was a guy who leaned more into analytics than I think Tito does, and the analytics say you don't let a guy face a lineup third time through. So usually third time through, you could count on David Bell having a really short leash for some of these guys, and it feels like Tito lets them go a little bit longer. And so your bullpen isn't as taxed. It also feels like Tito knows who to use in long relief better. It felt like David Bell at times, where you'd have a bullpen day or you'd have a starter only go 3 or 4 innings. It would just be a bunch of 1 inning guys that he would run out there. And so you'd have a new pitcher every inning. Tito, it feels like he knows how to use the long relief guys like Brent Suter or Ryan Richardson, who got optioned back down to AAA, but he was up here for a little bit to help out with some long relief stuff. Tito is running those guys out there, letting them go 3 innings, and they've looked really good so far. Brent Suter is a guy who looked not great last year for the Reds, and he looked really good for the Reds this year. I'm pretty happy with Brent Suter and happy with the bullpen overall, and really happy with the pitching staff overall. I feel like they've kept us in a lot of games that a lot of those winnable games are games where the offense didn't play well, and the pitching staff kept us in it. A couple of those are pitching staff things, but like I said, you're going to have days where your pitching staff isn't great, um, and you just hope on those days the offense can pick them up. But yeah, I like our staff. My one concern with it is depth. Carson Spires, Rhett Lauder, Wade Miley, they're all hurt or rehabbing injuries. So that's three starting pitchers who you don't have available to you right now if someone goes down. Chase Petty got called up on the taxi squad due to a doubleheader last week, and he looked pretty rough in his debut. I'm not saying Chase Petty is a bust in any way. It was just it was a bad debut for him, and he just needs a little more time to develop in AAA, and he really needs to develop a good put away pitch. He was getting to two strikes on a lot of guys, and then he just couldn't. He would either let him walk or get a hit. He couldn't put guys away. So if he can develop that down in AAA, I think that's when you start to really see Chase Petty succeed at the major league level as well. Um, I think one thing from a lineup perspective is that this team still needs a big league outfielder. Austin Hayes is back on the injured list with hamstring stuff again, and it just feels like that hamstring is a thing that we're gonna have to hear a lot about as Reds fans this season, as much as I hate to admit it. Hamstring things are tricky. Soft tissue things are tricky. So he's back on the IL with that hamstring thing. And it just shows that this outfield has a lot of holes in it when you don't have Austin Hayes. Gavin Lux, he's been serviceable in left field strictly from a defensive standpoint. He's been great offensively. I have nothing bad to say about Gavin Lux at the plate, but he's not making all the plays that you would expect a big league outfielder to make. He's worth -4 outs above average in left field this season. So it could be way worse. That's a guy who's never played left field in his professional career. So it definitely could be way worse. He's making all the routine plays. So I can't complain about that. It just feels like, you know, there are plays to be made by a guy who's played outfield in the big leagues that he's leaving out there. And I can't fault him for that. But I think that's more of a team construction problem. Blake Dunn is a guy who we've seen out in the outfield a lot, and he's not proven himself to be a big league player. He's got a 176 batting average, a 354 on base percentage, and a 76 OPS plus. He plays good defense. He's got good range. He's really quick on the base paths. I wouldn't hate to have him around as like uh, a pinch runner or a defensive substitution late in games, but I don't think he's a starting outfielder for in the major leagues right now. If he figures it out, good for him. But right now he's not hitting like a major leaguer, and it we have to run him out there because of the Austin Hayes injuries, and it's tough to watch at times. Jake Fraley, he's just about league average from a statistical standpoint as far as his production at the plate. But in an ideal major league outfield, he's a fourth outfielder. He's a platoon guy. He can't hit lefties. He only hits righties. And so, that's why we're running Blake Dunn out there a lot of times because Jake Fraley can't play against lefties. And so, he's batting 216. He's got a 333 on base and a 96 OPS plus. So he's about league average. His defense hasn't been great in the outfield either. I think, he's like I said, he's a fourth outfielder in a good major league outfield, but because we have no outfield depth, it's sort of he's got to go out there and play. He's got to be one of your starters. The only outfielder that I'm confident in that isn't Austin Hayes is TJ Friedel. And TJ Friedel, he's been a really good leadoff guy for this team. He's not hitting for a ton of power like he did in 2023 or when he was healthy last year, but he's getting on base a lot. He's creating havoc on the base paths, and he sets the table for this lineup really well. But he has a checkered injury past, so if he gets hurt, then it's Blake Dunn, Gavin Lux, Jake Fraley, and Santiago Espinal. Sometimes Santiago Espinal is sort of same thing as Gavin Lux. He's just not. He doesn't play. He didn't play outfield in the big leagues until the Reds started playing him out there because they needed to. So it's really Hayes and Friedel are your two big league outfielders, and then you've got a bunch of guys that you're just throwing out there that probably shouldn't be starters in a major league outfield. Um, and I think that's the one key piece this team is really missing is another big league outfielder. If we're still on it at the trade deadline, I would love to see us go get someone. It's sort of as we heard throughout the whole offseason, the trade market is really rough right now. Everyone wants big league talent. No one's really dealing prospects for big league or no one's dealing big league talent for prospects. And mostly what the Reds have is prospect capital. So I don't know if we'll get it. I'm sure we'll touch more on it when we get closer to the trade deadline, but I think that's definitely what this team needs to add. Um, Really my main thing from this past month is that this is the window for the Reds. We have to capitalize now. You've got Ellie, you've got McLean, Spencer Steer, Noelvi Marte, Tyler Stevenson, Hunter Green. These guys are good, and the Reds won't spend money to keep them all around. They're not the Dodgers. They're not the Mets. They're not the Padres. They're not gonna spend all the money to keep Ellie and Matt McClain and Noelvi Marte and Spencer Steer around. They're just not gonna do it. So, you have to do something before these guys hit free agency. And so it's kind of now or never, at least for this Reds lineup, this window. It's sort of, you've got 3 years until Ellie hits free agency, I think. You better do something with those 3 years. Um, all of the young core, I think, looks really good. Ellie, he looks much more comfortable at the plate this season. He's taking his walks. He's hitting what the pitcher is giving him more this year. As of Saturday, his strikeout percent is down 5% from last year, and his walk rate is up, I think, about one walk per nine or one percentage or something like that. But he looks much more comfortable at the plate. You can just tell that he's not trying to do too much. He's not trying to hit for as much power. And I think that's fine with Elliott. He's going to run into balls because he's just got that natural talent to hit baseballs out of the park. I think, if he can focus on taking his singles, taking his doubles, and getting on base, that's when and even taking his walks, that's when he's most dangerous because he's so fast that pitchers have to worry about him stealing. They sort of get rattled out on the mound. And Reds fans have seen that his running game in and of itself can create runs. Matt McClain, his stats aren't there yet, but he's playing really, really good defense at second base, and his savant page gives me a lot of hope. He's hitting the ball hard and he's not chasing very much, and his BABIP is only 196. So he's super unlucky on balls in play. I expect him to turn it around at some point. I don't know when it's going to be. I hope it's soon. The sooner Matt McClain turns around, it feels like the sooner we're going to really go on that hot stretch that I touched about earlier. Um, Noelvi Marte seems to be back to his 2023 form after his bad year last year. His strikeout percent is way down and he's taking more walks. He's playing much better defense as well. Noelvi Marte was supposed to be the third baseman of the future. Last year, he gets the steroid suspension for 80 games, comes back, and he looks terrible. Um, this year, he looks like the third baseman of the future again. So I'm really happy to see Noelvi succeeding. Spencer Steer has gotten hot recently. He was a guy who was struggling early on in the season because he missed so much of spring training, but he's hitting the ball well recently. He's got a couple home runs in the last 2 weeks. So I think Spencer Steer he's starting to turn that corner, and we're going to see Spencer Steer be the Spencer Steer that we know he is. Tyler Stevenson came back from injury on Friday. So you've got Tyler Stevenson back. He looks good at the plate in his first few games. He has a couple doubles. Obviously, the home run yesterday. He did have a hard time controlling the running game in his first game behind the dish on Saturday. I think the Cardinals stole, or no, it was the Nationals, but they stole like 4 bases on him or something like that. So you're hoping that's just a thing where he needs to get his reps in. Um, more than anything, but he had a tough time controlling the running game. And Hunter Green is a legitimate Cy Young candidate for this team. He's got a 2.53 ERA. He leads the NL in WHIP. His walks per nine are way down from last year, and he has a 0.93 batting average against on his slider. I mean, that pitch is it. I've seen swings from major leaguers, and it just looks absolutely ridiculous. Some of the pitches they're swinging at and the way they're swinging at him. He has developed a legit put away pitch. When you combine that with his fastball that he's consistently throwing at 100 this year and locating really well, Hunter Green, this is the best version of Hunter Green I've ever seen. Um, you combine all of these young guys sort of figuring it out, playing well, putting it all together with Tito managing, and it feels like this is it. This is the team that can end the playoff drought and the playoff series drought. I mean, we haven't won a playoff series since 1995, so it feels like this is the team to do it. I'm really hopeful that it is. If they can limit the sort of if they can limit the losses in games that feel winnable or even play 500 in those games as opposed to losing all of them, this is a team that definitely has the talent to make a postseason push. And I think that they're capable of it. It's going to be a matter of what do they do when the schedule starts to get hard. What what team are they when they truly start to get tested, I think is, when we're really going to figure out what this team is about. And that's my takeaways from this Reds team through the first month. We're going to get into our around the league segment now, Chris, if you want to kick us off with that.
Yeah, I guess so. One thing going back to the Tito thing, one thing I'll comment on there is that 4-17 stretch that you mentioned from last year. Nothing on Tito's track record really says that that bad of a stretch is going to happen. I don't remember really any stretches that bad in Indians Guardians lore when Tito was the manager. There have been some pretty mediocre Indians teams that Tito has managed, and there was I to my recollection there have never really been stretches that have been that bad. So I think that the likelihood of the Reds just epically collapsing for three,
Mm,
4 weeks is like it's not impossible, but I think it's a little bit less likely than, like when David Bell was the manager. So,
yeah, it
um,
felt like David Bell was a guy who all of his press conferences were so solemn and sad. He was never too high at his press conferences, and it always just felt. And when the losses happened, you could just hear it in his voice. It was like he was so sad and so upset, and it just felt like he never really had that fire. He never had the clubhouse fired up. Jonathan India, when Tito got hired, his quote was, those guys needed someone to light a fire under their, you know what, we don't swear on this program. But it feels like Tito is the guy that will do that and sort of prevent those long, losing streaks like you touched on just then. Yeah.
yeah, so getting into the around the league segment, this also kind of ties into what the Reds are like could experience. It's the Orioles. The Orioles put together a really young core, like a good young core, and they won 101 games a couple years ago, and they have done nothing with their roster, and now they're just a complete dumpster fire. Um, I think it sort of speaks to like they're a case study of like you can have all the young prospects you want and you could hold on to them all you want, but if you don't do anything in free agency and like actually spending money to make your team better, then your team is not going to go anywhere for a long period of time. And I think, the Orioles pitching staff has been outside of, like Tom, I forget his name, Sagano,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
35-year-old Japanese guy. He's really been their only good starter. And then, Felix Bautista, I don't have the stats pulled up here, but Felix Bautista has really been their only good reliever. So, um, yeah, I just, uh, yeah, I hope the Reds don't end up like that. I
Yeah.
definitely, especially like with Chase Burns coming up, like they definitely
Right.
have some more young prospects coming up, and they already have a good young core. So, like you said, the Reds definitely do need to address some issues on their team and
Hmm.
and build around their roster. So,
Yeah.
another team that I will mention is the Seattle Mariners. This is one of the top storylines in all of baseball. Everybody's been talking about them. They have the same offense, like personnel wise, as they did a year ago. They were like third to last in all of baseball and all around offense last year. And now they're fourth in baseball in OPS, which is sort of, one of the telltale stats that we use
Yeah.
today. Um, and Jorge Polanco has come out of nowhere and he's a front runner for the MVP. Like he has a 1.250 OPS, which is absolutely ridiculous. I think that's almost as good of an OPS as Aaron Judge has. I know
Hmm.
Aaron Judge's batting average is super high, but
Yeah.
um, he's right up there with like Aaron Judge and um, Shohei Ohtani has been off to kind of a slow start, but I'm just trying to think of other guys with like meteoric OPSs like that. But Jorge Polanco is sort of, he's having an insane start to the season.
Hmm.
266 OPS plus, 9 home runs, 25 RBIs. The Mariners are sixth in runs scored. They're fourth in home runs. Something's in the water in Seattle. I'm not going to accuse them of cheating or anything because that's kind of a tired tinfoil hat to wear, but something's a little suspicious with that Seattle team. Another guy that has sort of really turned it around is JP Crawford at
Yeah.
shortstop. He has 147 OPS. He's known for his defense. Cal Raleigh, he's legit. I I expected Cal Raleigh to be, an MVP candidate, and he's really
Yeah.
showed. And Julio Rodriguez seems to be turning it around too. So yeah, this Seattle team is actually really good this year. So
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a, when I talked about the Reds, they can take one of two paths, and I think we're seeing it with the Mariners and then with the Orioles. I mean, the Mariners, maybe not so much of they didn't have so much of the young core as the Orioles did, but they were a team who had a really good pitching staff. They just couldn't figure it out offensively, sort of like the Reds were early on in the season. The offense has clicked. Now we're seeing the Mariners play really good baseball. They're leading the AL West, and barring a pretty big slowdown, it looks like they might run away with that division because they've been really good through the first month, and then
yeah. Well,
the Orioles.
The Mariners had a huge lead in the division last year, and then
That's true. Yeah.
they're known to not really put it together for a full season, but
The offense looks better than last year, though,
it
for
does
them.
look better than last year. So
And
um,
then the Orioles, they're they're the opposite side of the coin. They have this really good young core. They go from a 100 loss team to winning the AL East, which is one of the most competitive divisions in baseball. And then they let all the free agents walk. They don't go get anyone. And I'd be really mad if I were an Orioles fan. You've got this
yeah,
exciting young core. They lead you to two playoff berths in a row after some pretty abysmal years. And then the ownership cheaps out. And, it feels like with their pitching staff, you've lost every game before you even throw a pitch because of how bad they've been. And,
yeah,
the Orioles were a team that as a Reds fan, I looked to for hope. Um, when they started to get good with their young core, I was like, oh, we we're like we're sort of doing the same thing as the Orioles. They're winning the AL East. Like we can be that good. And now I look at them and it's sort of a cautionary tale. Like, don't let this happen to the Reds because then I'll be really, really sad.
yeah, for sure. I was gonna say something about the Mariners, but then the thought escaped me. So I'll get on to the another kind of bullet point I had here was that Tristan Casas had a just a terrible injury.
Yeah.
He ruptured his left patellar tendon, appears to be out for the season. This kind of opens up the door for Roman Anthony,
Hmm.
top prospect in baseball, to finally make his MLB debut. So, Roman Anthony is a really he kind of I feel like he could be like the Adley Rutschman of
Yeah.
a few years later. You know how Adley Rutschman kind of sparked something in that
Hmm.
Orioles team a few years
Hmm.
ago when they went over 500 after that horrible season they had the year before. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I could see Boston. No hate on Tristan Casas. He's a good player and he seems like a really down to earth guy based on that docuseries. But I think that Roman Anthony is someone you could see in baseball very very soon.
Yeah, I definitely hate it for Tristan Casas. He was a guy that after 2023 I was super high on.
Yeah.
I think I took him in fantasy last year and he got hurt last year. It was a shoulder thing, I think.
It was a
Um,
rib cage.
Rib cage, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was out for a while, never really found it after the injury. He was off to a slow start this season. And
Yeah.
then,
He can't catch a break.
yeah, just another injury. I'm rooting for Tristan Casas. The Red Sox are one of those teams with a lot of likable guys. I don't really like the franchise, but I like the
Yeah.
players they have. And Tristan Casas is definitely one of those guys. So you hate to see it. You hate to see it for really anyone.
Yeah.
Um, One of my bullet points is that just, Aaron Judge is really, really good at baseball, and I feel like I don't think about it enough how good he is. And this year, he's taken it even to another level. I mean, he's a guy who's always been good, and it feels like this year he's found another level, which I didn't think was possible. He's an early triple crown contender. That's something we haven't seen since Miggy did it in 2012, right? He did that
Yeah,
in,
I
it
think it
was
was
2012.
12. I know a lot
Yeah,
about those Tigers teams back then. I think it was 12.
yeah, yeah. So Miggy was the last guy to do it. was 13 years ago. He's batting
Yeah.
432 right now, which is just insane. I mean, when you think of Aaron Judge, you think of a guy who's hitting 60 home runs a year. You don't think of a guy who's batting 432. And it's not like he isn't hitting for power. I think he's got six or more home runs. I'm not sure. I don't have the
He
number
has
for
10 or 11
10.
right now.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, he like having watched him in that Yankees series, he just takes what he could get. Like
Hmm.
he has the contact skills of Stephen Kwan right now
Hmm.
with, you know, Aaron Judge power. Like it's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah. So I'm going to be watching Aaron Judge pretty closely, I think, this season. Um, and it's wild that, the Yankees really aren't even playing. I don't know what their record is, but from what I've heard, the scuttlebutt seems to be that they're not playing their best baseball
Yeah, I
right
think they're
now,
like
even with
19 and
Aaron Judge.
15, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not
So,
playing great.
yeah. But yeah, Aaron Judge is really good. He's batting 432. That's just sort of shocked me more than anything. Paul Skeens, he had the worst outing of his career against the Cubs last week. I sort of put it on our outline as a sophomore slump, but there's no sophomore slump to speak of with Paul Skeens, at least at the current moment. He still has a 2.74 ERA. He has a sub one whip. If your whip is below one, that's generally a good sign. His strikeout per nine is down from last year, though. So I think that's something to probably keep an eye on for him if he does start to struggle or continues to struggle. Um, is he struggling to put guys away? Because that was his thing last year is he'd throw that splinker that was nearly unhittable and he could throw that at will and put guys away with it. And if he can't do that this year, it'll be interesting to see how he's able to adjust, I think.
Yeah, he's taken a couple of miles an hour off of like his fastball. He's not throwing
Hmm.
102 anymore. You don't need to throw 102 as a starter. I
Yeah,
think that he's sort of adjusting to not that like I mean he was amazing. His first season
right.
was like unheard of. But I think that in order to have longevity in baseball, you can't be throwing 102 miles an hour or 100 pitches every 5 days. You're like no human arm. I mean, there's Nolan Ryan, but he's
Right.
he's so far in the past that you can only really take Nolan Ryan with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But um yeah, there's very, very few people that can withstand that. And I think that we're seeing a byproduct of that lack of not lack of velocity, but the velocity decrease that may
Yeah.
or may not be intentional. I like to think it's intentional, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I know that he dropped his arm angle a little bit
Yeah.
from last season to sort
That's a
of,
trendy thing right
yeah,
now.
decrease load on the elbow and all that. So it could be a product of that too. He can't get the ball to break the way he wants to with the new arm angle, or he's not deceiving guys as well with the new arm angle. So, Paul Skeens is a pirate, so if he doesn't figure it out, I'm not going to be too upset. But he's also one of the exciting young guys in baseball, so you kind of are rooting for him because it's good for baseball when he's doing well.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then, yeah, my last thing here was the Jose Alvarado interaction with the kid in the stands who was, doing the wind up with him. I just thought that was a really cool moment. Last week, at one point, there was a kid in the stands at a Phillies game, and he was, going into the stretch with Phillies closer Jose Alvarado. And then, Alvarado saw the video that went viral. I'm sure if you're on baseball, Instagram, or social media or anything like that, you've seen the video. Alvarado invited him to meet him on the field, and he gifted him a bunch of stuff like a signed jersey, signed ball, signed hat. I saw that he gave him like the necklace. Alvarado gave him the necklace that he wore in the 2023 or 2024 season. And it just, things like this are what make baseball so cool. And they remind me, that even if the Reds aren't a good baseball team, this is still a really fun and interesting sport. You don't get this in other major US sports, it feels like. You don't see kids in the stands at football games, throwing the ball with the quarterback or um, basketball. We don't watch a lot of NBA, you and me, but it feels
Mm.
like there's really the fan interest isn't super there with the NBA at the current moment. It
It has
feels
a
like
cult
baseball.
following, the NBA
Yeah,
does.
yeah. But yeah, it feels like baseball is like, it is America's pastime. I feel like it's the one sport everyone in America knows. Even if you don't know much about sports, you know something about baseball. And it's cool to see, kids meet their heroes like this. And, I'm sure it meant a lot to the kid. I'm sure, it probably meant a lot for Alvarado too. It's just super cool.
Yeah.
It makes the Phillies, you and I both find the Phillies lineup very likable. I think it makes them even more likable. Jose Alvarado was a guy that I didn't really know a lot about. I just knew he was a decent pitcher. And so, this just shows, more of his personality, makes the Phils even more likable. So when October rolls around, if the Reds are out of it, I can root for them and feel better about it now. Um, but yeah, you
Yeah,
had a
yeah.
thing
I
about this.
was I was I was watching that happen live. So there was a rain delay in MLB Big Inning. Was on my TV, which basically
Mhm.
that shows like four games happening at a time.
Yeah.
And there was a bases loaded with I'll give like the background or whatever the
Mhm.
situation. There was bases loaded, nobody out. Alvarado was in the game, and obviously that's a huge jam. And Alvarado eventually worked out the inning. Unscathed. He didn't give up
Mhm.
a run. So, and the kid was panned to when there was bases loaded and two down. Like it was
Yeah.
a super intense situation. It was a very close game, late in the ball game. And and that same pitch, Alvarado like struck the guy out like after
Yeah.
they showed the kid. So that was really, really cool. And I was thinking about you taking the those like phantom at bats in front of the TV when you're watching the Reds. So
Yeah. It's
that cracked me up. But
my
yeah,
phantom at bats are maybe not as wholesome as glamorous as that. Those usually happen when I've had a couple beverages and
yeah,
decide to break out the plastic beer bat I have and take a
yeah,
couple hacks with the Reds. And usually I don't help them out as much as it seemed this kid helped out Jose Alvarado. So yeah, just one of those things where, baseball is it's a fun game to watch, and then it's an interesting game even off the field. There are things that happen that just make baseball special. And, one of those reasons um why I love the sport. I think, that's a good way to end it. It's sort of a
yeah,
bookend of two reasons why baseball is so awesome,
yeah. You
catching
had
the home
a
run ball and
heartwarming
then
story at the beginning, and then a heartwarming
yeah,
story at the end. It's like a fact sandwich, if you will,
there we go.
or
Yeah,
an
great way to end it.
analysis sandwich.
Yep. All right, yeah, so that's where we'll leave you. Hopefully your heart's a little bit warmer. Maybe you're like the Grinch, it grew a couple sizes today thanks to One American Baseball podcast. Thanks a ton for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Peace.